this is Ashley.
And this is Megan, and this is the Mito podcast, and this is our second episode today. So we're going to be talking about quite a few things, but we're going to start with what is mitochondrial disease and what is the mitochondria, and then go from there and talk about how you get diagnosed and eventually going to mitochondrial dysfunction. So the first thing is, what is mitochondria? Mitochondria is basically in all of your cells except for your blood cells. And it is what produces the energy that everything in your body needs to use to be able to run, work. This is all of your systems in your body, your digestive system, your respiratory system, everything.
Your organs.
Yeah, literally everything. So all the cells in your body have mitochondria, except for the blood cells, like I said. And if they're not producing or able to make the energy that is needed, then those mitochondria and those cells end up actually dying. So if you think about it, your whole body is charged up with these mitochondria. It's like little batteries all over your body. So if you have mitochondrial disease, those mitochondria do not work. They're not producing the energy that you need, so all the cells in your body begin to die and dysfunction, and they're not able to produce energy. So one of the things, which actually you said when we were on the news one time, is having mitochondrial disease is like trying to power an entire house with one battery.
Yeah.
And so it makes it really difficult when your mitochondria aren't functioning correctly.
And your body, when your mitochondria are not functioning correctly, your body has to choose what's going to work. So a lot of times when we have mitochondrial disease, a lot of the complications come from organs not working anymore because your body is trying to just like keep the heart going or keep your kidneys or so a lot of times when people are diagnosed with mitochondrial disease, they pass away because their organs fail.
Exactly. And your heart, your muscles, and your brain is actually what uses the most amount of energy. So those are the things that, like you said, your body is putting those first because those are the things that need the most energy. So other systems are not getting the energy that they need. So, so if you have a mitochondrial disease, it means that your mitochondria are not functioning properly. There are quite a few different mitochondrial diseases.
There's so many that we would never be able to get through them on a podcast.
and to be honest, I was even looking at the UMDF is the United Mitochondrial Disease Foundation, and they have an amazing website. I was even looking at the different ones today before this podcast, and I mean, there are so many. There's about 40 listed on there, but I know there's actually more than that.
There's hundreds.
Yeah. So there are quite a few, but it basically comes down to the fact that your mitochondria do not work. Therefore, you have a mitochondrial disease. And so there's so many ways and different ways that presents in children and in adults. And so we're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and it's different for every person. Even if you have the same exact disease, which I think we kind of talked about in the first podcast, if you have the same disease, even the same genetic marker, you will have different symptoms.
You can present completely differently.
There's no cookie cutter explanation for any of it.
And that's what's so hard as a parent to hear this and to research. It's like you're trying to figure out what is going to happen to your child, what are they going to be able to do, not be able to do.
It's constant research, and you're looking for just one kid to help you understand how your road is going to end up. So I think it's easier for us to be able to explain that by telling you our own stories. And I know in the first podcast, we talked a little bit about our kids. So now we can talk about what the day-to-day was like, or is like. Do you want to start with Troy?
Sure. So Troy is about to turn 12, and I think, going back and looking at how he presented, definitely just the hypotonia, the floppiness, just not meeting those milestones, not being able to hold his head up. So that kind of almost what it looks like is muscle weakness. That was the big thing that we saw and that we continue to see today. Troy can walk, but he requires a lot of assistance. He will use a walker when he wants to. But otherwise, we do a great deal of supporting him in getting up out of chairs, just getting out of bed, doing all those different things that require so much muscle movement. It's very difficult for him. And then that also goes along with his speech. Unfortunately, we don't think about when we talk, but it's actually difficult. It involves so many muscle movements in our mouth and with our tongue, and so it's very difficult for Troy. So he only has a few words in his speech, and he uses sign language and different things. He does take a nap every day because he gets tired. There's so many different activities that we have to be very careful of because if it tires him out too much. I'm trying to think of just all the things.
What time does he usually get up in the morning?
So he didn't start sleeping through the night till he was almost 5 years old, and he would get up multiple times in the night. And then finally he did start sleeping through the night. And honestly, it just depends. If he didn't get a nap in for some reason, if he didn't fall asleep, or for some reason our schedule didn't allot for it, he will sleep 9 o'clock, I think, is the latest he's ever slept. But otherwise, if he's had a nap and he's ready to go, sometimes he's up at 6:30. So it just really depends on almost what we did the day before. So that's definitely one of the things.
So now does he get like 8 hours of sleep generally at night, or?
He does, yes, he does. And other things are eating. Unfortunately, his hands, he's a big one on not wanting people to touch his hands and just different things with his hands. It's taken him a long time to learn to hold a fork, so we primarily feed him. One of the other things that mitochondrial disease affects is your optics, so he wears glasses. There's just so many things. And yes, absolutely, he's developmentally delayed. I almost couldn't say that. So he's 11, but he's probably somewhere around a 4-year-old in his development. And so there's a lot of different things that we do. Even though he's such a big kid, I'm 5'8", and he's almost as tall as I am. But there's so many things that we do that you would be doing with a 4-year-old. But he requires a lot of support throughout the day. But he's an extremely happy child. We're very fortunate. He's very happy. He has so many people around him that love him and support him and help him do all the things that he needs to do. So that doesn't mean he doesn't have his moments, because he does. But in general, he's a very happy child. And I'm sure I'll think of more things as you talk about Angie. But yeah, there's a lot of things that go with this disease that go hand in hand with other kids. But then there's kids that, we have a lot of families that their child is pretty normal functioning, but they do just get tired. There's the whole just different ends of the spectrum when it comes to this disease. And it's progressive, and I think that's kind of the scary thing, is it is progressive.
So it's interesting, some of the things that you were saying, because Angie, there's definitely differences and some things that are alike. Like you were talking about Troy's hands. Angie also didn't like her hands being touched.
Yeah.
It was really hard to be able to get like her handprint on like art.
Oh, I know. We've tried to do so many crafts.
Oh yeah, she hated it. She's like, nothing better touch my hands. And with eyes for Angie, so we had a vision therapy or a vision teacher. She wasn't really therapy, but vision impairment professional. I don't know. She even told us Angie looked like she should not be able to see anything, but she could. So a lot of times, doctors and teachers, it's really hard to gauge what someone with mitochondrial disease can or cannot see. So Angie's eyes, they would go all over the place. It's hard. Like sometimes they would point out, sometimes one would point one direction and the other one would be looking at you. So you never really knew which eye was on you, but she definitely saw everything. Same thing with like colors and shapes. Whenever our vision teacher would come over, she would purposefully put colors that Angie should not have been able to see. And every time Angie was able to grab those as an object, like the different, like let's say we use yellow. I'm kind of going on a tangent, but if we use yellow, if you use something flat versus a ball, you shouldn't be able to tell, I think, the difference between the two. And Angie was able to tell if there was an object versus paper. But where it's a slightly different is sleep. Angie, so in the very beginning, for the first like 4.5 months, it was horrible sleep. I was up maybe every 30 minutes, 45 minutes. But she was also breastfed, so she used that as a tool to fall asleep, but she also had reflux. So I don't know necessarily if she was really hungry or if it was the reflux, but being able to breastfeed or being able to get up with her calmed her down. But it was every 45 minutes, which was exhausting.
Yeah, absolutely.
We did do some sleep training with her. And after we did that, it was maybe 2-3 days of that. I sometimes think of it as like a switch kind of got flipped in her head, to where after our 3rd day of sleep training, she would sleep like 12 hours a night.
Oh, wow.
And I would have to wake her up in the morning to get ready to go to the nanny and get ready and get dressed. But she also had to take naps. She could only last maybe 3 hours before needing to take a nap. And she was always in bed by 8. So she slept a lot.
Yeah.
She needed a lot of downtime. For us, the same thing with her being kind of floppy. My sister just had a baby, and when I hold her, it's a different feeling than when I held Angie. And I never knew that. I was first-time mom, so I didn't understand. I wouldn't have known that as a sign or a symptom. But Angie was more floppy than the average baby. And now, like in hindsight, I can look back at those times and think, oh, okay, there was a difference. And I think I said this before, but I thought all my friends were just like, they weren't really my friends anymore because no one told me how hard it was.
Well, it's like you think about it, and I remember when Troy was little, it's like their heads. And when they're a brand new baby, everybody's used to supporting their head, but we're talking about like a 6-month-old still having to support their head. You can't just sit them somewhere. You can't just, hold them like you would hold a regular baby. You have to support all the different parts of them, because otherwise they're just going to literally, their head will just fall back or forward, or, it's very, very different.
Right. I think Angie, she wasn't able to really hold her head up well until she was probably 10.5 to 11 months. And then that's when I finally was able to start holding her on my hip.
Yeah.
But yeah, every child's different. I think I kind of went backwards on explaining Angie's story. I should have started from when she was born. But every child is going to be different. And not every doctor will understand those symptoms. And we're lucky because we are in a city that has doctors that research mitochondrial diseases. But that isn't to say that there's families in San Diego that haven't been diagnosed because they haven't seen the right doctors.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I think we struggle with, and this is definitely perfect timing for this, to have this discussion with the flu season, but for a mitochondrial child, a child with mitochondrial disease, illnesses are such a huge part of almost the progression of their disease. They can have mito crashes when they get sick. They can actually die from so many different things. And the flu is such a scary thing for a child with mitochondrial disease. And so in our daily lives with Troy, it is so important that everyone that we associate with or bring him into contact with has to know that if they're sick, if they've been around anybody that's sick, that
even if they think they have allergies.
yeah, exactly. The allergies one is hard. Oh, I have allergies. Well, no, everybody says that, and then it ends up being something else sometimes. So, I mean, I carry multiple packets of wet ones with me 24/7. Anything Troy touches, I'm washing his hands. The flu season is the scariest part of the year for us because we are doing our very best not to expose them to illness, and it's so difficult. And I think that's one of the things that we struggle with daily. Troy did get the flu a year ago, and he was in the hospital for a week. Fortunately, he gets the flu shot every year, and it didn't affect him extremely bad, but just the daily trying to keep our children healthy is a big struggle for a Mito parent. And I think that's one of the things that just really changes your lives. We have another family that has 2 girls, and one of their girls had just a cold and ended up being in the hospital for weeks and weeks. And this was a few weeks after she had a cold. And because, kids can go into a mito crash, they use up all their energy trying to fight off whatever illness they have, and then they have nothing left to run their bodies. So it's very scary when it comes to illnesses.
We have sanitizer stations posted in our house. I had sanitizer bottles everywhere. We have like 10 of them in every single room, or one in each room, so that people are constantly using it. And now, or even then, but especially now, when I play with like my nephew, when I pick him up from school, I freak out I still freak out when I go to the park or anything. Like I see things and all I see is germs.
Yeah, and that's the thing. I mean, bringing my new husband into the picture, it's like I think no one thinks about germs the way a parent does that has a child with mitochondrial disease. Any surface that you touch, anytime you see, like the playgrounds and things like that, it's just breeding grounds. And it's like you have it's like you have goggles on that show you this vision of every possible germ that's out there. And it makes you a little crazy. I know people probably look at me when I'm wiping down everything going, what is she doing? That lady's crazy.
No, the same thing for us. Like even when we had to fly somewhere, Andrew and I, we would go through and we would wipe everything down. Yeah. And people would be looking at us like we're crazy, like those germaphobes.
Yeah, exactly.
Angie couldn't be near something that hadn't been wiped down.
Yeah. We used to actually, because Troy has flown his family out of town, and we would take one of his little twin sheets and literally put it on the seat. We'd wipe it down first, but then we'd put it on the seat so he wasn't, and then wipe down the window and everything that he would possibly touch, like you just said.
Yeah. Angie was small enough to where I pretty much just breastfed her on the plane and just covered her so she couldn't touch anything. I was like, don't touch it.
Yeah.
Also, like a lot, our kids can't go to school, and they miss out on socialization because they can't be among their peers. I mean, every parent, or even non-parents, know that schools are just a breeding ground for colds. Your kids are always sick, and they just keep passing it back and forth. The young ones don't understand to wipe their nose or to blow their nose or sanitize their hands. Yeah, exactly. So our kids, oftentimes we have to have teachers come into our homes because they cannot safely be among other people, which makes it really hard and makes it really lonely. Because you want your kid to have all those experiences. You want them to have friends and to be able to be in a learning environment in that sense. And it's just, unfortunately, not a logical place or a safe place to bring our kids.
Yeah, and Troy did go to preschool, but I was teaching at the time, and I only taught 60%, so I would go with him. And if anybody was sick, I would take him out or take him home, but eventually, probably, I guess, first grade, it just became where it was just too dangerous for him. There were too many kids that were constantly sick, and so we took him out, and he's on what's called a home hospital program where, like you said, the teacher comes to the house every day. And I don't know how many IEPs I've been at with him and with his teachers before we just 100% put him on home hospital, and just cried because I knew he loves being around kids. He loves watching them. But, it's just, you cannot keep them safe from illness.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunately, you just have to find other ways to introduce them to kids and different activities, because school, unfortunately, is pretty dangerous for our kids. But there actually are a lot of Mito kids that go to school. It's not
Yeah.
saying that they can't or that they don't. Those are choices that, parents make, and some kids aren't as severe as others, and they're
Right.
able to tolerate illnesses a little bit better. But, for mine, Troy, and probably Angie, it's
Yeah.
just, it's
And it's also the severity too. How severe is the mitochondrial disease that your child is being diagnosed with? And some families are able to do part-time, like they can go from like March through June.
exactly, that's what we did with Troy at the
Yeah.
beginning.
Also for Mito, we should also say that there is no cure. There are things that you can do to help the symptoms. Things that we were talking about before, like sleepiness, the eyes being able to see, some developmental delay. There's different vitamins that you can take that help those parts of your body to function a little bit easier, or just your body to function.
Exactly.
Which we will cover in another podcast. But Angie, I can say, and it doesn't work for everyone. Again, every child is so different.
And there are so many different variations of
Right.
what we call it, the Mito cocktail.
There's no two alike.
No.
The dosages that you give are based off of the child's weight. So for Angie, when I was talking about how sleepy she was, that was the first year of her life. She was just exhausted to the point of where she could barely keep her eyes open. Like, you just looked at her and you knew that she was just exhausted. But she did have to have a feeding tube. And that kind of goes into, she also had like sensory issues. So we wanted food to be enjoyable and a fun thing for her. And getting her to eat wasn't fun because we were trying to get her nutrition, which is another major thing for mitochondrial
Yes.
or Mito kids. So we got the feeding tube because she was losing weight, she was falling behind. And then after we got the feeding tube, and that's terrifying to make the decision that your child needs a feeding tube.
Yeah.
Like, you feel like a failure because you can't get your child to eat. But you're not.
No, definitely
You're
not.
not. And sometimes kids, even if you don't have Mito, sometimes kids just need a feeding tube.
It's actually really common.
Yeah. So there's two different types. Angie had one that went through her stomach, and that was how we gave her her Mito cocktail. And it was the most, I still remember it. It was just the most amazing day. I was already terrified with, oh man, I'm going to cry.
That's okay. That's what we do here.
I was already terrified about the feeding tube, and now I'm putting on this role of the nurse because now you have to figure out how it works and don't panic if something falls out and how to put it back in, and if you're hurting them, if you're not hurting them, how to manage the balloon on the inside. And but so she had her first dose of the cocktail that we had been trying to give to her for like 3 months, and she smiled for the first time.
Yeah.
And it was like breathtaking, because you have this child who doesn't have the ability to show emotion. Like, she couldn't cry, she couldn't laugh, she couldn't frown, she couldn't smile. You knew what she needed, even though she couldn't show you those emotions. But that first dose, it was just insane. And sorry.
It's okay.
Andrew was playing with her. He was holding her, And he was like shaking his head in front of her, kind of like rubbing her nose with like his nose. And all of a sudden she copied him
Aw.
and did the same thing. And we flipped out. We were like, oh my gosh, get the camera.
Yeah, where's the
what
camera?
If this never happens again?
Yeah.
I need it on film. And it was just beautiful. It was the coolest like moment. And it was just amazing to have this cocktail to bring us that part of her that we would have never been able to see had we not tried those vitamins.
Exactly.
So I think even though the cocktail doesn't work for everyone, I 100% think everyone should try. Even if it's small doses at first, talk to your doctor, find a doctor that has done a Mito cocktail, because you don't know until you try it. And they're not crazy things. It's like vitamin E.
No, yeah, it's things that you can get over the counter, most of them.
Actually, most of it, I would say 95% of everything that Angie took was over the counter and couldn't be covered by insurance.
Yes.
It was stuff that, like, if you go to the gym and you have any knowledge of supplements,
Yeah.
you're going to see that your child is taking the same stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a life changer for her.
Yeah. And Troy started the cocktail when he was about 2. And we didn't really notice much of a difference. But it's something that, he's been doing so well for so long, especially when you look at the statistics for Mito kids that, we know it's got to be doing something, So I think, like you said, it really depends on the child, but it's definitely something that you need to try with your Mito kid. And like we said, there's so many variations. I mean, there's things you might have given to Angie that I don't give to Troy. I know just in our little group of moms, there's different things that other moms do that we don't do. And it's not necessarily that it's bad for them or so experimental, but sometimes it's just because we don't know. I mean, every time we get together with other moms, I feel like, oh, you're doing that? Exactly. I didn't even know about that. It's
same thing with nutrition. Some kids function better on a keto diet.
Yeah.
And some kids, they've tried that on or some parents have tried that on their kids, and it does nothing.
Yeah.
And it's a good rule of thought for just anyone in general, but nutrition is one diet might work for one person and doesn't work for another. It's just how your body is.
And metabolizes things.
Right.
Yeah. And I think one of the other things, too, besides just the Mito cocktail is therapies. Our kids are in so many different therapies, whether it's physical therapy, occupational therapy, speech therapy, feeding therapy. There's so many different things that are available to them to help them progress, and at whatever rate they're progressing at. But, those are things that Troy goes to weekly in multiple therapies. One of the ones that he loves is his horse therapy, which just brings out a smile and laughter in him the entire time. And some of the others, PT and OT, they're hard. They're very hard for them. Speech therapy he loves, but some of the other therapies are difficult because they really have to work. They really have to spend a lot of energy. And some of the things they just can't do. Yeah. So those are important things as well.
So for our next podcast, we are going to dive in a little bit deeper to what mitochondrial disease is by talking about its genetics, the mutations, and how it is or isn't inherited.
Yes. So yes, our next one will be a little bit scientific, but
we will try to be on layman's terms, but sometimes it gets a little hard.
It does. And, we'll also talk about how you can get diagnosed, because that can be a very long road for some parents, and that's important. And the genetics of it is how they diagnose it. So that's very important.
So if you have any questions about anything that we covered today, please email us at mitopodcast@gmail.com, or you can go to our Facebook, because we have one now.
Yes, we do, newly.
So if it looks a little bare right now, we're trying to build it.
Yes, pictures and things will be coming soon.
Yes, so go to Facebook. You can leave comments, questions right there. And you can also listen to this podcast at mitopodcast.com, which is also on iTunes.
It's on iTunes, and we're working on the Android phone so that you can also listen to it on that.
That's what I have.
Yeah. Oh, good. We're going to get there. We're on our way. We just got iTunes.
So if you have an Apple, you're set.
Yeah. Otherwise, you can listen to it from the website too.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Which is, again, mitopodcast.com.
Yeah. Thank you so much for listening to us, and have an amazing day.